Everybody's heard of Billy the Kid, Wyatt Earp, and Jesse James. But Native American gunslingers? Almost nobody talks about them. And yet, they were some of the deadliest sharpshooters the Wild West ever saw. These warriors didn't rely on brute force. They combined generations of tracking skills, stealth, and deadly accuracy with firearms. In this video, we talk about 7 legendary Native American gunslingers of the Old West. Some fought against the U.S. government, others worked as lawmen or bounty hunters, and a few walked the outlaw path. But first, if you enjoy our content about Native Americans and the Old West, remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you will be the first to see our new updates. Thanks for joining us once again. Let's begin. Cherokee Bill would be near the top of the Wild West and had a list of its most wanted outlaws. Born Crawford Goldsby on February 8, 1876, at Fort Concho, Texas, he was a mix of African American, Cherokee, Mexican, and white ancestry, a heritage as diverse as the lawless frontier he would come to dominate. His father, George Goldsby, was a Buffalo soldier in the 10th U.S. Cavalry. At the same time, his mother, Ellen Beck, had Cherokee and African American roots. Growing up in the Indian Territory, young Crawford was no stranger to the racial and cultural tensions of the time. The area was a melting pot of different communities: Native Americans, African Americans, white settlers, and freed slaves, all trying to carve out a life on the frontier. But along with opportunity came hardship, and the law was often enforced at the end of a gun. For someone like Crawford, trouble wasn't just a possibility, it was practically a way of life. By the time Crawford turned 18, he had already built a reputation as a dangerous man. His first known crime? Murder. In 1894, at Fort Gibson, Cherokee Nation, he shot and killed a man named Jake Lewis. From that moment on, the young gunslinger was on a collision course with history, leaving behind a trail of blood and terror. Adopting the name Cherokee Bill, he wasted no time assembling a gang that would become infamous across the Indian Territory. They robbed banks, trains, stagecoaches, and general stores, striking fear into both settlers and native communities alike. Cherokee Bill seemed to enjoy the violence, unlike some outlaws who stole for profit. He wasn't just a robber, he was a killer. His gang operated recklessly, and their list of crimes grew longer than a frontier map. Bill was personally blamed for at least 8 murders, and some reports claim the number was even higher. One of his victims, his brother-in-law. For all his boldness, Cherokee Bill's luck eventually ran out. In 1895, law enforcement finally tracked him down and arrested him. But even in captivity, he refused to go down quietly. At Fort Smith, Arkansas, he was placed under the watchful eye of Judge Isaac C. Parker, better known as the Hanging Judge. Bill had no intention of waiting around for his fate to be decided. In a desperate escape attempt, he grabbed a gun and shot a prison guard. He was quickly overpowered, but the incident sealed his fate. There would be no leniency for the outlaw. After a swift trial, Cherokee Bill was sentenced to death. When asked if he had any last words before being hanged, his response was cold and chilling. "I came here to die, not make a speech." On March 17, 1896, at just 20 years old, Cherokee Bill was hanged at Fort Smith. His death marked the end of a brief but deadly career, one that left a lasting mark on the history of the Wild West. Haskebe Naintail, a name as powerful as the warrior who bore it. Translated, it means the tall man destined to come to a mysterious end. Born around 1860 in Aravaipa Canyon, deep in what is now Arizona, he was a true son of the Tsigini, or Dark Rocks people, a subgroup of the Western Apache. Rugged and untamed lands shaped him into a survivor long before he became an outlaw. The Apache way of life revolved around survival, resilience, and an unbreakable connection to the land. Haskebe Naintail was raised with his and people's traditions, learning to ride, hunt, and fight from a young age. But his childhood was not just about mastering the Apache way. He also witnessed the slow but relentless loss of his people's land as settlers, soldiers, and fortune seekers pushed deeper into Apache territory. By the time he reached his early 20s, the Apache wars were in full force, and his world was changing fast. Some warriors chose to fight against the U.S. government, refusing to be driven from their homeland. Others, like the Apache Kid, took a different path, working as scouts for the U.S. Army. In the early 1880s, Haskebe Naintail became a scout for the U.S. Army, serving under the well-known General George Crook. The Army needed skilled native trackers to hunt down renegade bands, and Apache scouts were among the best. With his deep knowledge of the Arizona terrain and ability to move unseen through mountains and canyons, the Apache Kid quickly became one of the region's finest scouts. For a time, it seemed like he had carved out a future in this dangerous but respected role. But fate had other plans. Tensions between the Apache Scouts and the U.S. Army had been simmering for years, and things finally exploded in 1881 at the Battle of Cybeque Creek. In this bloody confrontation, several prominent Apache leaders were killed, and the fragile trust between the Scouts and the military was shattered. Apache Scouts who had once fought alongside the Army now found themselves viewed as potential traitors, and the Apache Kid was no exception. The turning point came in 1887 during a tribal ceremony. Accounts differ on exactly what happened, but the result was an accusation of desertion and mutiny. Despite his previous service to the Army, the Apache Kid was arrested and sentenced to death. However, his punishment was later reduced to 10 years in prison. But this was the Apache Kid. He was never meant to be caged. Prison couldn't hold him for long. He escaped, disappearing into the harsh, unforgiving Arizona wilderness he knew better than anyone. With soldiers and bounty hunters chasing him, he used his deep knowledge of the land to stay one step ahead of his pursuers. He became a phantom, easily slipping through canyons and deserts and repeatedly evading capture. Some claimed he formed a small gang of outlaws, raiding settlements and attacking wagon trains. Others insisted he acted alone, more of a lone wolf than a bandit leader. Regardless of the truth, his legend grew with every story told around campfires and saloon tables. Some said he lived out his days as a fugitive, always looking over his shoulder, surviving by his wits and skills. Others claimed he was killed in a gunfight in the early 1890s, and his body was left in the desert. There were even rumors that he escaped south to Mexico, vanishing into the Sierra Madre Mountains, never to be seen again. The truth? No one knows for sure. Whether he died in battle or lived to an old age, the Apache Kid's name has never been forgotten. To some, he was a ruthless outlaw who turned against his people and the Army. To others, he was a man who refused to be broken by forces bigger than himself. Ned Christie, born Nadawad on December 14, 1852, was a full-blooded Cherokee. He was raised in Wauhilau, deep in the heart of Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. He grew up steeped in Cherokee traditions, speaking his native language and following the ways of his ancestors. His people had survived forced removal, fought to hold on to their lands, and struggled against relentless encroachment by white settlers. By the time Ned came of age, the Cherokee Nation was caught between their traditional ways and the growing influence of U.S. law and expansion. But Christie wasn't just a warrior with a rifle. He was a statesman, a leader, and a defender of Cherokee sovereignty. He served on the Cherokee National Council, working to protect his people's rights while making a living as a skilled blacksmith and gunsmith. In 1887, U.S. Deputy Marshal Daniel Maples was shot and killed near Tahlequah, the capital of the Cherokee Nation. Without solid evidence, Christie was accused of the murder. Some claimed he had been drinking that night and got into a dispute. Others believed he was framed as a convenient scapegoat. Ned maintained his innocence from the start. He asked for a fair trial, but in the chaotic legal system of the time, a Cherokee man accused of killing a U.S. official had little chance of justice. His request for bail was denied, leaving him with two choices: surrender to an unfair system or fight for his freedom. He chose to fight. Rather than flee, Christie turned his home into a fortress. He built a two-story log cabin reinforced with thick timber and surrounded by natural defenses. He stocked it with weapons and ammunition, preparing for the inevitable battle. Lawmen came for him repeatedly, but Christie was no ordinary fugitive. He was a master of guerrilla warfare. He repelled every attack with his knowledge of the land and expert marksmanship. His ability to stand against federal marshals for 5 years made him a legend among his people. Christie's resistance wasn't just about survival. For the Cherokee, he became a symbol of defiance, a man who refused to bow to a system that had wronged his people for generations. While newspapers called him an outlaw, many Cherokee saw him as a hero, fighting the same battle their ancestors had fought. By 1892, the U.S. government had had enough. Marshal Jacob Yose led a posse of lawmen armed with dynamite and heavy firepower for one final assault on Christie's stronghold. The battle was fierce. Christie and his allies fought back, but the odds were impossible. Lawmen detonated explosives against his walls, blasting open his defenses. In the chaos, Ned was shot and killed, bringing an end to what became known as Ned Christie's War. But the story didn't end there. Years after his death, evidence emerged, proving that Ned Christie had been falsely accused. Witnesses came forward, claiming he had nothing to do with the murder of Deputy Marshal Maples. The real killers? They were likely whiskey runners or outlaws looking to settle a score. Born in 1859, Sam Starr was a Cherokee outlaw who found himself right in the middle of the Wild West's most notorious criminal circles. He wasn't just some petty thief or nameless gunslinger. Sam ran with the James Gang, the Younger Gang, and some of the most feared outlaws of his time. His life was one of crime, rebellion, and, ultimately, a violent end that secured his place in legend. Sam was born into the Cherokee Nation, a people who had already suffered forced removal, broken treaties, and relentless pressure from white settlers. Like many Cherokee men of his time, Sam grew up watching his people navigate a world that was changing fast, not in their favor. But rather than accepting life under government control, Sam took another path of resistance, lawlessness, and survival on his terms. By the time he was young, Sam was deep in outlaw circles, rubbing shoulders with legendary criminals like Jesse James and the Younger Brothers. He quickly built a reputation as someone who didn't scare easily, could ride like the wind, and had no problem breaking the law if it meant staying free. In 1880, Sam's life took another infamous turn when he married Belle Starr, a woman who would soon be known as the Bandit Queen of the West. The two were a perfect match. Belle was just as bold, cunning, and rebellious as Sam, and together they became one of the most feared outlaw couples in the territory. The newlyweds set up a ranch along the Canadian River in Indian Territory. They named it Younger's Bend, a not-so-subtle nod to Sam's connections with the Younger gang. But this was no ordinary homestead. Younger's Bend became a haven for criminals, fugitives, and wanted men. If you were an outlaw on the run, Sam and Belle Starr's ranch was the place to lay low, hide out, and plan your next move. Some of the biggest names in outlaw history, including Jesse James, were rumored to have spent time under their protection. Sam and Belle didn't just hide outlaws. They were active criminals themselves. They were horse thieves, bootleggers, and experts at evading the law. Sam had contacts throughout the Indian Territory, allowing him to smuggle stolen horses and goods across the region without getting caught. But lawmen were never far behind. By the mid-1880s, the U.S. Marshals were determined to bring Sam Starr down. He and Belle were arrested multiple times, with charges ranging from theft to harboring criminals. But every time the law tried to pin him down, Sam managed to slip away until his luck finally ran out. In 1886, Sam Starr's reckless life caught up with him. He got into a heated argument with a lawman named Frank West, a man who had been after him for a long time. The details of what happened next are murky, but one thing is clear. Sam Starr and Frank West drew their guns simultaneously. A gunfight erupted, and when the smoke cleared, both men lay dead. Sam had spent his life dodging bullets, riding with outlaws, and outsmarting the law. But in the end, he went out the same way many Wild West gunslingers did, with a gun in his hand, fighting to the last breath. Henry Starr would be right up there with the best of them if the Wild West had a Hall of Fame for bank robbers. Born on December 2nd, 1873, near Fort Gibson in the Cherokee Nation, Starr was Cherokee through and through. Raised in a land where native identity, outlaw culture, and the struggle for survival all mixed. But Starr wasn't just another gunslinger looking for trouble. He was bold, smart, and ambitious. A man who could ride hard, shoot straight, and outthink the law at every turn. He didn't just rob banks. He pulled off some of the most daring daylight heists the Old West had ever seen. And when Hollywood came calling, he starred in a movie about his life. Henry Starr came from a family that knew both sides of the law. His father, George "Hop" Starr, was respected. He was also nephew to Belle Starr, the infamous Bandit Queen of the West. Crime ran in the blood, but so did the relentless spirit of the Cherokee people, a spirit that refused to be broken, no matter the odds. But Starr's life wasn't all shootouts and robberies from the start. After his father died in 1886, his mother remarried, and Henry's new home life became rough. Instead of staying put, he took off, working as a cowboy and learning to survive independently. And while most outlaws were about guns and loot, Henry Starr had a sharp mind. He spent his time reading classic literature and studying law, not because he wanted to be a lawyer, but to outsmart the system trying to lock him up. Henry's descent into crime wasn't planned. It was forced upon him. He was wrongfully accused of horse theft, and from that moment on, he saw lawmen not as keepers of justice, but as enemies. By 1892, Henry decided to regain his power. His first big move was robbing the railroad depot in Nowata, Oklahoma. It was a small job, but it set the stage for what would come. That same year, things turned deadly. During an attempted arrest, Henry shot and killed U.S. Deputy Marshal Floyd Wilson. Suddenly, Starr wasn't just a thief, but a wanted killer. And in the Wild West, that meant one of two things. Either you kept running or faced the hangman's noose. With no intention of getting caught, Starr assembled his gang, a crew of outlaws ready to hit banks, trains, and anything else worth looting. By 1893, he and his men were tearing through the region. After a particularly daring bank robbery in Bentonville, Arkansas, the law finally caught up to him in Colorado Springs. Starr was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 15 years. But he didn't let that slow him down. Instead, he read, studied law, and waited for his next move. By 1903, he was back on the streets, determined to go straight. For a while, it looked like Henry might turn things around. He opened a restaurant with his mother and married. He even had a son, whom he proudly named Theodore Roosevelt Starr after the U.S. president. But old habits die hard. By 1914, Henry Starr was back to doing his best, robbing banks in broad daylight. With a new gang, he went on a crime spree, pulling off 14 bank robberies in just 2 years. And these weren't just quick, sloppy jobs. Henry and his crew walked in, guns drawn, and out with sacks of cash in the middle of the day. The law had had enough. A $1,000 bounty was placed on Starr's head, dead or alive. His luck ran out in 1915 during an attempted double bank robbery in Stroud, Oklahoma. A local lawman shot him down just as he thought he had another easy score. This time, he was captured and sentenced to 25 years in prison. But Henry Starr wasn't just a thief, but also a showman who knew how to become a legend. While behind bars, he got an offer Hollywood couldn't resist. They wanted him to star in a silent film about his own life. The result? A Debtor to the Law is a movie in which the real Henry Starr plays himself, acting out his past crimes for the camera. It was a move no other outlaw had ever pulled off. Billy the Kid and Jesse James had stories told about them, but Henry Starr acted in his legend. For a moment, Starr might finally walk the straight path, but once an outlaw, always an outlaw. On February 18, 1921, Henry tried one last bank job, this time in Harrison, Arkansas. But the town wasn't about to let a famous outlaw rob them blind. The bank's president, W.J. Myers, grabbed a rifle and shot Starr before he could even make it to the vault. 4 days later, on February 22, 1921, Henry Starr died from his wounds. Before railroads and barbed wire tamed the Wild West, the Cherokee Nation ran by its own rules, laws, and warriors. One of the toughest among them was Ezekiel Proctor, a man who lived by the Cherokee way, fought for his people, and wasn't afraid to get his hands bloody if it meant protecting what was his. Born in 1831, Zeke Proctor came into this world at a time when the Cherokee Nation was being torn apart by war, betrayal, and forced removal. He was a full-blood Cherokee, raised with his ancestors' traditions, values, and unshakable pride. But like many of his people, he was ripped from his homeland in Georgia and forced to relocate to Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, on the deadly march known as the Trail of Tears. Zeke grew up in a world where survival meant being strong, loyal, and ready to fight when necessary. And when the time came, he didn't back down from a fight, no matter who stood in his way. Despite the hardships of his youth, Proctor rose to become a respected leader within the Cherokee Nation. He wasn't just some outlaw looking for trouble. He served as a sheriff, a federal marshal, and even a Cherokee senator. He upheld Cherokee law in a land where the U.S. government was always trying to interfere. But the Wild West had a way of turning even lawmen into gunslingers. Ezekiel Proctor's downfall came in 1872, and it all started over a family feud, a woman, and a lot of bad blood. The trouble started with Polly Beck Kesterson, a woman from a powerful Cherokee family who had married a white man named Jim Kesterson. Ezekiel Proctor didn't like that one bit. Some say it was because of his deep Cherokee pride. He didn't want Cherokee women marrying outsiders. Others whisper that he had feelings for Polly himself. Whatever the reason, when February 27, 1872 rolled around, Proctor decided to settle things himself. He tracked Polly and Jim down at a local mill, where a heated argument turned deadly. When the dust settled, Polly was dead and Jim was badly wounded. Proctor didn't run. He didn't hide. He knew he had to face Cherokee justice, and that's exactly what he did. In most places, a murder trial meant one man standing before a judge. But in the lawless days of the Indian Territory, it meant a gunfight waiting to happen. Proctor's trial was set to occur in a Cherokee court at the Going Snake District Courthouse. The Cherokee authorities clarified that this was their land, people, and trial. No outsiders were needed. But the Beck family? They wanted revenge. They weren't about to let Proctor walk free. And they had friends in high places, including the U.S. Marshals Service. On April 15, 1872, as the trial was underway, a posse of marshals and Beck family members stormed the courthouse, determined to take Proctor by force. It was a bad idea. The Cherokee inside the courthouse weren't about to let their laws be ignored. Before anyone knew it, guns were drawn, bullets flew, and bodies hit the floor. When the smoke cleared, 8 U.S. Marshals were dead, along with 3 Cherokee men. It was one of the bloodiest gunfights in U.S. Marshal history, a day that came to be known as the Going Snake Massacre. And in the middle of it all, Ezekiel Proctor is still standing. After all the bloodshed, you'd think Proctor would be hanged on the spot. But here's the twist. He was acquitted of all charges. The Cherokee court ruled that he had acted in self-defense, and since they were on Cherokee land, their decision stood. The U.S. government was furious and wanted to put him on trial again in a federal court. But Proctor had one thing on his side that no gunslinger could outrun: political power. The Cherokee Nation stood by him, refusing to let the U.S. interfere in their laws. Eventually, the federal government backed down, deciding it wasn't worth igniting another war with the Cherokee people. And just like that, Ezekiel Proctor walked free. Now, most men would take a second chance at life and lay low. But not Ezekiel Proctor. Instead, he returned to being a leader in the Cherokee Nation. He spent the rest of his life serving his people, holding various official positions, and proving that he was more than just a gunslinger. He was a warrior, a lawman, and a man who lived and died by Cherokee justice. He died in 1907 at age 76. Before the West was fully settled, highways cut through the rugged land, and law and order reached every dusty town. Some men lived by their code. Warriors turned lawmen, trackers turned gunslingers, and men who walked the fine line between chaos and justice. One of those men was Tom Threepersons, a full-blood Cherokee who carried his ancestors' untamed spirit into the Wild West's final days. He wasn't just another sheriff or bounty hunter. He was a man who fought bandits, faced down cattle rustlers, tracked fugitives through the desert, and even invented a holster design that would become legendary. Born on July 22, 1889, in Veneta Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, Threepersons came into a world where Native Americans were still carving out a place for themselves after years of government betrayals, forced relocations, and broken treaties. But if history had taught the Cherokee anything, it was how to endure, adapt, and fight back when needed. And Tom Threepersons? He did all three. In 1916, Threepersons rode south to Douglas, Arizona, with one goal: winning a rodeo. A skilled horseman, he intended to make a name for himself in the arena. But fate had other plans. That same year, Pancho Villa and his band of revolutionaries raided Columbus, New Mexico, sending shockwaves through the region. General John "Blackjack" Pershing launched a military campaign in Mexico to hunt Villa down. Threepersons, never one to shy away from a fight, put his rodeo dreams on hold and joined Pershing's punitive expedition as a scout. After his military service, Threepersons settled in El Paso, Texas in 1920, where he joined the local police force. His partner, Officer Juan Escontrias, would become part of a legendary duo that took on smugglers, bandits, and killers along the Texas-Mexico border. El Paso was a rough town in those days. Bootleggers ran liquor across the border, cattle rustlers preyed on ranchers, and outlaws had little fear of the badge. But Threepersons wasn't the kind of lawman they could intimidate. In 1921, during a gunfight with criminals, Threepersons took a bullet to the chest, a wound that would have put most men in the ground. But instead of dying, he kept fighting. Some say he dragged himself back to his feet and kept firing until the outlaws were either dead or in cuffs. Word spread fast. If you were breaking the law in El Paso, the last man you wanted on your trail was Tom Threepersons. As if being a police officer wasn't dangerous enough, in 1922, Threepersons took on a new challenge: federal prohibition agent for El Paso. His job? Hunting down bootleggers, smashing illegal liquor operations, and stopping the flow of alcohol during Prohibition. It was dangerous work. Criminals were getting richer and more violent, and lawmen who interfered didn't live long. But Threepersons wasn't known for playing it safe. The job didn't last long, though. In 1923, he left law enforcement behind and took a position running the Cudahy Ranch in Durango, Mexico. But Mexico had problems. Cattle rustlers ran wild, and Threepersons wasn't about to let them steal from him. When he caught them in the act, he did what any Cherokee warrior-turned-lawman would do. He fought back. A gunfight broke out, and when the smoke cleared, Threepersons had killed several rustlers. But this time, he wasn't in Texas or on the right side of the law. The Mexican authorities arrested him, and for a brief moment, it looked like his story might end in a Mexican jail. Instead, he made a daring escape, returning to the United States like a true outlaw-turned-hero. Threepersons might have been a great lawman and gunslinger, but his biggest legacy came not from the fights he won, but from how he carried his gun. In 1925, the S.D. Myers Saddle Company of El Paso introduced a holster based on Threepersons' design. Unlike most holsters, this one had a cutaway top that exposed the pistol's hammer and trigger guard, allowing for faster draws and smoother handling. Gunfighters, lawmen, and even Hollywood cowboys quickly adopted the Tom Threepersons style holster, which became one of the most influential designs in history. By 1929, the years of gunfights, injuries, and hard living finally caught up with Threepersons. A head injury forced him to retire from active law enforcement, and he chose to live out his days in the wilderness, far from the violence of his past. He built a ranch near Gila, New Mexico, where he spent the rest of his life guiding hunting expeditions, tending to his land, and staying out of the public eye. In 1969, Tom Threepersons passed away in Safford, Arizona. He was buried in Silver City, New Mexico, and his name was forever linked to the legends of the Old West. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. We hope you enjoyed this video. Which story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for joining us once again. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Native American history, remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.